Impact. Real human interest stories ranging from the ordinary to the truly extraordinary.
Hello, this is Rhea Gamana, and you're listening to Impact, the program that introduces you to extraordinary human interest stories from around Canada. The precarious conditions of temporary foreign workers in Canada continue to worsen. They are afraid to complain due to their status, given that they might get deported and are therefore unable to get the protection they need. Among advocates, there have been discussions towards policy changes to protect them. We will hear from members of Filipino community organizations and a non-government institution who will provide us the context behind the worsening crisis of labor trafficking and exploitation, with particular reference to the Justice for Mushroom 4 campaign.
I'm Remigio Padora of Bayan Canada. I'm a member of National Executive Committee Bayan Canada. By the way, Bayan is a progressive alliance of different sectors of Philippine society, basically the sectors of workers, peasants, professionals, like those working in public sectors, teachers, health workers, students and youth, women, and indigenous people. And Bayan Canada is a chapter formed here in Canada, which has, as of now, has three main organizations, mainly coming from the youth and students, which is the Anak Bayan, the women sector, the Gabriela, and of course, from our kababayan, the migrant sector, which is the Migrante-Canada. The case of mushroom workers was already known to us since last year, but since we didn't have direct contacts from the workers directly involved in particular place of work, we didn't have in-depth knowledge or information how their situation and how the system worked until lately, when couple of individuals got contacted with one of our affiliates of specifically the Migrante-Ontario, that mainly the one who directly got involved in the investigation and discussion of the among the victims. Among them were these four workers whom we call now the Mushroom 4. From time to time, or for some occasions, Bayan took part in meeting with these four to have some updating and information regarding their situation, and we took part in navigating what course of actions to be taken and so on. But it was Migrante-Ontario actually is the one at the forefront in handling these concerns. In terms of gathering information, discussions of their rights being violated, and navigating legal questions that we are going to course through as a remedy to their plight as victims. We in Bayan helped them by assisting or by providing access to our network, like lawyers whom we solicited legal advices, and some actually offered their services as pro bono lawyers. We also helped them have an access to medical personnel for affordable health assistance, because these people don't have OHIP, so when they get sick, it's impossible for them to have a regular access in most of the medical clinic, more so in the hospitals. They really are very vulnerable. This case of Mushroom 4 is only one among the thousand cases that are happening in Canada and around the world right now, because most of these victims are desperate of looking for jobs. Unscrupulous recruitment agencies took advantage of their vulnerabilities. And here in Canada, there's no clear laws yet that restricts recruitment agencies of manipulating these temporary migrant workers. Because of abject poverty, lack of employment, landlessness, poor social services by the government back home, our countrymen are forced to go abroad to look for jobs. As of 2017, for example, 11.1 million Filipinos were unemployed and underemployed, and this number continues to grow. Minimum wage is far below as compared to living wage. Moreover, life gets worse because of the 30 strain law. As of November last year, national debt was already 7.2 trillion. Ownership of manufacturing for export are at the hands of foreign investors and dependent on imported raw materials. Philippine economy is very weak. Duterte puppet regime, the same as his predecessors, continue to implement neoliberal policies that pushes the local economy to be more import dependent, thus weaken its capacity to address poverty, landlessness, and joblessness. Massive forced migration will still be a problem we have to face every single day.
Anong klaseng bayani ang inyong sinasabi sa dyaryo at TV? Ipinagmamalaki, di namin kailangang tawaging ganito. Di namin kailangan ang papuri ninyo. Kailangan namin ay respeto. Kailangan namin ay respeto bilang tao.
My name is Lenny Rose Simbre. Currently, I'm the chairperson of Migrante-Ontario, an organization composed of migrant workers and advocates for migrants' rights here in the province of Ontario. We promote migrants' rights and dignity against all forms of discrimination, exploitation, and abuse in workplace and in the community. We are also fighting for the national democracy in the Philippines. Over the last 2 years, migrant workers are approaching us, especially overseas Filipino workers working in the mushroom farms in Ontario, and many of them are currently without status and have been subjected to many forms of exploitation from their employers and recruiters. Since then, we began conducting our own research. In the case of mushroom poor, they also approach us. They are also victimized of all this unscrupulous agency. The main issues of migrant workers here in Canada are, first, they are in temporary status. Second, they are tied in working permit, means that they are not authorized to work in any employer stated than in their contract. Then they cannot also attend any institution or take any academic or training courses. And lastly, they don't receive enough services from Canadian government and even in our Philippine government. The case of the mushroom workers are not isolated incidents of exploitation here in Canada and in the Philippines. For example, one of the mushroom worker, Lourdes de Pena, she came from peasant family because they don't have their own land to cultivate, so she was forced to work abroad to sustain her family. In order to solve the root cause of migration, which are landlessness, joblessness, and poverty, we call to scrap the labor export program. The J4M4 campaign is also fighting for this. Today in the Philippines, there is a growing movement who are calling for the ouster of President Duterte. After 3 years in the office, the Philippine people, including OFW, realized that Duterte doesn't stand for Filipino workers. He stands for landlords, foreign corporation, and imperialist nation like China and US. As each day President Duterte sits in power, the Filipino people continue to suffer. An individual or organization can join in the campaign by signing or sharing the petition of the J4M4, join the J4M4 campaign team or the movement, or just join the Migrante-Ontario.
Anong klaseng bayani ang inyong sinasabi? Yaon bang dumaranas ng lungkot at hirap sa ibayong dagat, sa dayuhang amo? Ang mga tulad ko ay minamaltrato, kailangan namin katarungan.
My name is Jason Reyes. I'm the coordinator of the Migrants Resource Center, Canada. This case came to the attention of the Migrants Resource Center through one of our partner organization, Migrante-Ontario, where alerted us of the situation of the mushroom workers, particularly the 4 mushroom workers here in Ontario. Well, first of all, it's important to note that this kind of labor exploitation, particularly for migrant workers, do happen in Canada. Historically, it has happened mainly because of the prevailing economic policy that Canada has had for the last, safely we could say, for the last 4 decades, and this is what we call the neoliberal policies of Canada. When we say neoliberal policy, generally it refers to an economic system which is free trade is extended to every part of our society, both in public and in personal world. It refers to the transformation of the state being able to provide public service supposedly, but becomes a promoter of market and competition, putting the interests of private companies first. So if we look at the last 4 decades in Canada, we can safely say that neoliberalism has been the reigning economic policy that can best describe the Canadian economy. This includes immigration. So historically, when we look at Canada, it's a land of we say it's a land of immigrants. Historically, Canada has used immigration to build its economy as well as to build its population. It has always brought immigrants to settle here in Canada, but when we look at time from the 1970s onwards, we've started to see how different administration looked into more of a temporary migration, and this has became the peak, when the Canadian government introduced the Temporary Foreign Worker Program. The Temporary Foreign Worker Program is a federal program that permits Canadian employers to bypass Canadian labor market and tap into a pool of foreign workers who are readily available, often from the global south, to work jobs that are, we say, dirty, demeaning, and dangerous. And this has been the case since the early 90s, right? We've seen the beginning of the live-in caregiver program in 1992, where we've seen a lot of Filipino live-in caregivers coming into Canada, and then the seasonal agricultural worker program, where we've seen workers from the Caribbean country who are picking mushrooms and tomatoes in different parts of Ontario. It's happening because Canada continues to rely on the neoliberal economic policies. Particularly now, we have seen the growing dependence of labor migration. I think in the last 3 years, about 80,000 workers being brought to Canada with a temporary work permit. And a lot of them work in agriculture, a lot of them work in service industry, in hospitality industries. Particularly with this case, we have seen that migrant workers are seen to be working in greenhouse mushroom farms, where they're asked to work long hours, close to 12 to 16 hours. They are being underpaid, and this is also because of the piece rate that allowed in agricultural sector. This is the reason why Canada has these issues today when it comes to migrant workers. So part of the work of the Migrants Resource Center is to do information and referral, as well as the education and training for migrant workers. So upon hearing the case of the Mushroom 4, we immediately referred them to our legal partners, particularly through the University of Toronto Faculty of Law. They were able to refer us to Goldblatt Partners, which is a law firm based here in Toronto, Ontario. The two labor lawyers were kind enough to take their give their service on a pro bono service. We immediately set up a meeting with the mushroom workers as well as with the two labor lawyers to start compiling the evidences for the labor complaint as well as the immigration complaint. On the immigration side of things, because the 4 workers have lost their status through this process, we immediately referred them to an immigration consultant who works at an immigration firm to look to restore their immigration status through a humanitarian and compassionate grounds. So very similar process. They took the task to compile all the necessary information to apply for a humanitarian and compassionate grounds. Now, lastly, with our work with MRCC, we also believe that, we want to change policies that will, remove barriers for migrant workers who are working here in Canada. So one of the ideas of the workers, together with their organization Migrante, is to start a petition campaign. And this petition campaign is a simple ask to the province of Ontario to introduce stronger proactive measures when it comes to protecting migrant workers. And this petition asks directly to the Ministry of Labor of Ontario to ensure that migrant workers are protected from predatory recruitment agencies as well as employers who need to be registered. And lastly, of course, the call for many migrant workers who come to Canada is for them to be given permanent residency upon arrival here when they come to Canada. Many migrant workers and allies as well as Canadians can support and should support the campaign of the J4M4 simply because this is about human rights. It's about equal opportunity and supporting, workers who come to Canada who are looking to build a better future for themselves as well as for their families, which is essentially the dream of everybody. The only difference is that they come into a system that is fundamentally flawed. They come into a system that fundamentally exploits them. So the least that we could do is to support their cause, particularly to support the petition campaign that they have initiated, For other Canadians and allies who would like to learn more about the campaign and see how they can support and learn more about migrant justice altogether, they can reach out to the Migrants Resource Center. Our office is located at 30 Stephanie Street, Toronto, Ontario, and our phone number is 1-866-275-4046, and they can call this number and inquire more.
Ngunit hanggang ngayon nagbubulag-bulagan, kayong naririyan sa pamahalaan. Maglingkod kayo, mga walang pakialam, sa aming paggawa ay nakikinabang. Klaseng bayani ang inyong sinasabi, kayong naging sanhi ng aming pagkaapi.
Tigilan na ninyo ang pagkukunwari at kami hindi na palolokong muli.
Natututo na kaming lumaban, matututo pa kaming lumaban. Ngunit hanggang ngayon nagbubulag-bulagan, kayong naririyan sa pamahalaan. Maglingkod kayo, mga walang pakialam, sa aming paggawa ay nakikinabang. Ngunit hanggang ngayon nagbubulag-bulagan, kayong naririyan sa pamahalaan. Maghanda na kayo, mga walang pakialam, migranteng Pilipino ngayon lumalaban. Migranteng Pilipino ngayon lumalaban.
That was Justice for Mushroom 4 migrant workers Jessie Veneranda, Lourdes de la Pena, Maila Ceguerra, and Marisol Bobadilla, and advocates Jason Reyes, Remigio Pahadura, and Lenny Rose Simbre. For more information on the feature, please visit the Justice for Mushroom 4 Facebook page. And before we leave, our thanks to Migrante-Ontario, Bayan Canada, Migrant Resource Center Canada, the Vibe News Desk Department, Radyo Migrante, and VX3 Exchange.
Impact is a production of VX3 Exchange, featuring the stories of extraordinary people, sharing their stories again and again at vx3exchange.com or our social platforms at VX3 Exchange.